I left the perfect partner. And only. Then did I understand why I wasn't looking for the truth. It lit up on the screen by itself. That sentence keeps replaying in my head because it's the only honest way to explain how everything finally came apart. I didn't dig. I didn't snoop. I didn't even suspect. I just reached for a phone to turn on navigation, standing in a parking lot with the engine running, thinking about nothing more than traffic. And then the screen woke up. Before I get there, I need to explain who we were, or at least who I thought we were. From the outside, our relationship looked like something people quietly envied. We were the couple friends pointed to when conversations turned to stability. No screaming fights, no public drama, no obvious cracks. My partner was attentive in all the ways that mattered on paper, remembered birthdays, checked in during stressful weeks, showed up when promised. They were emotionally literate, gentle, dependable. The kind of person therapists would probably nod approvingly at. I used to describe them as easy to be with, and I meant it as a compliment. We lived together, shared routines, planned months ahead. Grocery lists stuck to the fridge. Sunday mornings that moved slowly on purpose. Even our silences felt cooperative, like we were both good at not demanding too much from each other. That should have been enough. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was watching my own life from a slight distance. Not unhappy exactly, just muted. Like the volume had been turned down so gradually, I hadn't noticed when it happened. I told myself this was adulthood. This was what calm looked like after chaos. This was what people meant when they said love wasn't supposed to be dramatic. So when restlessness crept in, I blamed myself. I wondered what kind of person feels unsatisfied with something so objectively good. I read articles about commitment anxiety. I listened to podcasts about long-term relationships losing intensity. I rehearsed gratitude in my head like a discipline. Look at what you have. Look at how lucky you are. The idea that something might be wrong, not with me, but with the reality I was standing in, felt almost insulting. My partner hadn't done anything wrong. That mattered to me. I wasn't reacting to cruelty or neglect. There was no villain I could point to. There was just a quiet sense of being slightly out of alignment, like wearing shoes that technically fit, but never stopped reminding you they were there. When I finally decided to leave, it wasn't dramatic. No explosion. No betrayal. Just a conversation that felt heavier with every sentence. I tried to explain something that didn't have a clean explanation. I said words like disconnected and not myself. I hated how vague they sounded even as I said them. My partner listened calmly. Too calmly, I thought at the time. They asked the right questions, said they were willing to work on things, reminded me of what we'd built together. I remember thinking how unfair I was being, how I was dismantling something good because of a feeling I couldn't even properly name. When I walked away, I carried a lot of shame with me. I told friends a softened version of the truth. I said we wanted different things. I said timing was off. I avoided saying the part where I just didn't feel fully alive inside the relationship anymore. That part sounded selfish even to my own ears. For a while after the breakup, I replayed moments from our life together, looking for reassurance that I hadn't imagined the goodness of it. And I found plenty. Vacations where we laughed easily, evenings where we cooked together without speaking much, and it felt comfortable, safe. Evidence that I'd left something stable for something undefined. That's why the moment in the parking lot still feels surreal. We were meeting briefly to exchange some final things, practical leftovers of a shared life. I offered to drive us because it was easier. At some point I needed directions. My phone was dead, so I reached for theirs without thinking. That was still normal then. Muscle memory. The screen lit up. A message preview sat there, unfinished but intimate, in a way that made my chest tighten instantly. Not sexual, not explicit, just familiar, affectionate, the kind of tone you only use when a rhythm already exists between two people. It used a nickname I'd never heard before. For a second, I genuinely thought my brain had misfired. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, waiting for context to rearrange itself into something innocent. Maybe a friend. Maybe a coworker who just wrote strangely. Maybe I was projecting because of the breakup. I handed the phone back without saying anything. The rest of the drive passed in silence that felt thicker than usual. My partner talked about logistics, dates, boxes, keys, as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't just tilted slightly off its axis. I didn't confront them that day, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know what I was accusing them of yet. One message doesn't equal a secret life. One unfamiliar nickname doesn't rewrite a relationship. But it lodged itself somewhere uncomfortable in my mind. Over the next few days, that message kept resurfacing at odd moments. When I remembered nights they'd been distracted but reassuring. When I recalled how carefully they'd balanced work stress with emotional availability. When I thought about how rarely they ever seemed overwhelmed. How composed they always were. I started replaying timelines. Certain late evenings that had been explained as long meetings. The way their phone was always face down, which I'd once admired as presence. The subtle emotional distance I'd felt but couldn't articulate. At the time, I'd assumed it was my own withdrawal, my own restlessness contaminating the relationship. Now I wasn't so sure. I didn't go digging through devices. I didn't demand answers. What happened instead was slower, and, in some ways, worse. Conversations from the past rearranged themselves quietly in my memory. Things they'd said casually that now carried different weight. Moments where I'd felt oddly unseen and brushed it off. Eventually, I asked. Not accusingly. Not angrily. Just directly. There was a pause on the other end of the line that told me everything before words even arrived. It wasn't the pause of confusion or offense. It was the pause of calculation, of deciding how much truth to release. They didn't confess dramatically. There were no tears or apologies that felt cinematic. Just an admission, carefully framed, about an emotional connection that had blurred boundaries. Someone from work. Someone they'd grown close to over time. Nothing physical, they said. Nothing intentional. I remember feeling a strange mix of vindication and grief, not relief, not really. Just a quiet confirmation that the discomfort I'd carried for so long hadn't come from nowhere. As more details emerged, I realized how carefully the double life had been constructed, not in a chaotic, reckless way, but in a disciplined one. They'd been present with me, attentive, invested, and somehow still maintaining a parallel emotional world that siphoned off something I'd felt missing but couldn't name. What hurt wasn't just the existence of the other connection. It was how invisible it had been, how seamlessly it fit alongside our life without disturbing the image of perfection. I thought back to all the times I'd felt guilty for wanting more, for sensing a lack I couldn't justify. I'd internalized it as a personal flaw, a failure to appreciate stability. Meanwhile, part of the intimacy I'd been reaching for had already been redirected elsewhere. Suddenly, the ideal partner made a different kind of sense. They weren't lying in obvious ways. They weren't neglectful. They were simply divided, and very good at it. The perfection I'd admired was, in part, a performance made possible by emotional outsourcing. We talked more after that, but none of it brought closure. There was no moment where everything aligned neatly. Just the slow, dull acceptance that what I'd left wasn't exactly what I'd thought it was, and that staying longer wouldn't have brought me closer to the truth. What surprised me most was the absence of triumph. I didn't feel like I'd escaped just in time. I didn't feel smarter for trusting my instincts. Mostly, I felt sad for the version of myself who'd tried so hard to be content inside something incomplete, and for the version of my partner who'd chosen secrecy over honesty while still insisting on being seen as good. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how my body responded differently to being alone. The constant low-level tension I hadn't even recognized began to fade. Not because I was happier, but because I was no longer negotiating with an invisible absence. I stopped rehearsing gratitude. I stopped asking myself why I couldn't just be satisfied. The truth is, I think I left before I knew, because some part of me already understood. Not intellectually, not in a way I could defend in conversation, but physically, emotionally. The signal came before the evidence. Looking back, I don't regret leaving without proof. I regret how harshly I judged myself for wanting something truer than what I had. I regret how easily I believed that perfection meant honesty, that calm meant wholeness. Sometimes people don't leave because they're reckless or ungrateful. Sometimes they leave because their intuition has already read the room long before their eyes catch up. I'm alone now. Not vindicated. Not bitter. Just clearer. And when I think about that moment in the parking lot, the phone lighting up, the message waiting without knowing who would see it, I don't think of it as the beginning of the end. I think of it as the final confirmation of something my body had already decided. I wasn't looking for the truth, but it was already there, glowing quietly, waiting for me to stop doubting myself long enough to see it.